Step into the fascinating realm of industrial metals, where steel prices fluctuate and market indicators are the pulse of an ever-evolving industry. Welcome to Cup of Joe, the metal podcast paying homage to our founder, Joseph T. Ryerson. Settle in, savor a cup of Joe, and let the conversation begin.
Hello, metal enthusiasts, and welcome to an April edition of Cup of Joe. I'm your host, Mike Carrazzo, and it's been a while. A lot has transpired over the last month. We've got spot index prices, new tariffs, brand new Taylor Swift album too. So a lot to unpack in this episode. And with me, as always, is friend, colleague, smartest man in commodities, I think, Nick Webb. I think someone who wasn't dissed on the Taylor Swift album, if I'm not mistaken, but I haven't gotten all the way through it yet. My daughters haven't. So we'll know.
Yeah, what are your thoughts on the album so far?
Not some of her best work, not like 22 and Red. The Red album was what plays big in my household. I got a 7 and 9 year old
already. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh gosh. Yeah. It's all over. We play it nonstop. I can sing you a song right now. I won't. But maybe a little bit later. How are you, Nick?
I will say that album is not exactly perfection for the gym. It's not exactly your pump up music. The new album
doesn't get you pumped up,
but it's good.
No. Yeah.
We don't want to get this podcast attacked by the Swifties. That's for sure.
Oh gosh. Yeah. You know what? I think we're in for it already.
Exactly.
Yeah. So how are you?
I'm doing very well. We got a lot going on in the last few weeks that we can discuss here in this podcast. We got spring. Spring has sprung. Got a bunch of plants growing over my shoulder. We're going to live on the land here in Chicago.
Yeah. It's hopefully it's going to be a warm one. That's for sure.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And we got a little bit of different show today. We're really excited. We have a guest coming on that we've been talking with and trying to get together on a show for a while now, but we're really excited to have her, Jennifer Betts. We'll bring her on momentarily and talk all things recycled metal and more. But before, do you want to put up the safe harbor so
of course.
we don't say anything out of bounds?
Yeah, as we always do, the boring part. We have to cover the safe harbor provision. These are the opinions of Nick Webb, Mike Carrazzo, Jennifer Betts. These are not the opinions of Ryerson. Do your own research. But like Mike mentioned, we have a lot of new type of content that we're going to be discussing here. We're going to get pretty deep in the weeds. So stick with us. And as always, this will be recorded because there's going to be a lot of content that gets pretty deep in there. And we hope you can review some of this, or certainly reach out to your sales reps or ourselves directly. But with that,
Jennifer, over to you. For those who aren't familiar with Jennifer Betts, you're not on TikTok or LinkedIn. You've got some really good content on there and really great background in metal. I think it's going to be a fascinating discussion. So Jennifer, why don't you tell everyone all about yourself?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you so much for the invitation. This has been a fantastic podcast. Yeah, let's not get it canceled immediately by the Swifties. So thank you for starting off on that. But for those who may not be familiar with me, yes, if they're not on TikTok or on LinkedIn, I'm Jennifer Betts. I'm the CEO of Recycled Media and Scrap Trader. I've been in the industry a couple decades at this point. I got my start on the raw material side of the industry. I was trading scrap metal, or as we call it now, recycled materials, for the David J. Joseph Company. It was acquired by Nucor Steel, so I did non-ferrous and then ferrous for many years. I was the raw materials manager at AK Steel, managing 5 melt shops, so I've done integrated and EAF steelmaking. I started my own brokerage and consulting company called Magner Metals for many years, where basically I took the purchasing agent skill set and helped the scrap yards or metal recycling facilities work out some better contracts with the steel mills for several years before working at Argus Media as VP of Business Development, and then at Flack Global Metals as the SVP of Business Development. And then thus recently, I have been trying to help our industry get a little bit more out there, a little bit more online, hence the TikTok, the LinkedIn. I'm a little biased, obviously. I think our industry is pretty incredible. So I'm trying to help our industry get out there, business development, recruitment, lobbying, next generation, hence the recycled media side of things, and then also bringing in a little bit from the technology side for Scrap Trader. So that's a quick introduction into my realm of metals to media.
Well, all kidding aside, Jennifer, Yeah, absolutely. I really I encourage you if you haven't followed Jennifer, go find some of her stuff. It's educational, it's fun, and this is an exciting industry. It really is. For those who don't know, I'm a content marketer by trade coming in here. I remember almost 6 years ago now saying you need someone to write stories about metal. Why? And then when you get entrenched in it, you're like, oh wow, okay, there's some really cool stuff going on here. So yeah, I think we have some shared interest there for sure. And you
Yes,
didn't mention you also have a podcast, and
I do.
we'll be getting into that a little bit.
Yes, a few things, a few irons in the fire.
Yeah.
So yeah, out there. And yes, I do love a good metal pun every now and then.
So,
There you
so
go.
Jennifer,
Nice.
question for you. We're just going to hop right into it with some of the questions. From my perspective, and I haven't been in the industry as long as yourself, but I've certainly been in the metal space for a while now. And one area that always seems like a dark hole of opacity is the scrap world. It's tough to get a whole lot of intel or figure out what they're doing day to day behind the scenes. And you had a pretty interesting post actually promoting this podcast where you kind of talked about certain timeframes over the course of a month that are a little bit more crunch time. You're kind of in the trenches. Do you mind kind of expanding on that a little bit to the extent you can? We're not asking for the secret sauce or anything, but to the extent you can share sort of what that looks like. Why are there these periodic, ups and downs within the scrap market throughout the course of the month, and kind of what's the point of it all?
Absolutely. So from a very broad sense, the ferrous scrap market really only trades once a month. And that's from a domestic standpoint. I'm not talking about export. This is from a North American standpoint. And a lot of that just really has to do from a logistics standpoint. It's challenging to process and transport the ferrous scrap just to the actual steel mills, right? So we do this in 30-day contract cycles, and we do it at the beginning of the month. So that's where a lot of the price reporting agencies are showcasing the price assessment from 30 days, the monthly price assessments, but they're getting those prices from the first week of the month. And it's from traders like my former self, essentially having the worst or the best week of the month that they've ever had. And it usually comes from an epic game of telephone, where the first week of the month is when we are all calling each other. We're discussing the flows. We're discussing the demand at the mills. We're seeing what are you hearing in the marketplace? What numbers are being thrown around? What are the OEMs doing? How many vehicles are being sold? Did you hear what the Fed rate? We're listening to Cup of Joe. What did Nick say this month on the macro economy? Like, where is the market going? And it's playing into all of these factors. And then the first steel mill jumps into the market and says, this is what I'm going to pay for shred this month. This is what I'm going to pay for busheling this month. And then that's the moment where all of a sudden 48 hours kicks off, and all of these traders are trying to get the best price for their scrap, and they have to place their tons, and they have so many hours essentially to get their scrap placed before the mills fill up.
Okay.
Right.
Interesting.
And it's kind of a ripple effect. Usually it starts within the Midwest, and I'm trying to be very respectful of your first PowerPoint slide here. And usually it starts in the Midwest, and it creates this ripple effect out throughout the country, right? So 48 hours is a very broad generic term where traders in one particular region the mills start to trade, traders start to fill out. It ripples out more into some of the other regions. And suddenly the trade starts to end up usually on the coast, is usually the last part of the trade.
Okay.
And then you usually get to the 10th day of the month, and everything in the country is settled by that point.
Interesting.
But each month is different. For instance, this month, we have a Friday that's the 3rd. Good luck getting that 48 hours kicked off.
Sure.
I mean, I'd love to see it, but okay, it's Thursday. Are we gonna has it kicked off, right? Is it gonna close of business Friday? Maybe, but probably not likely.
So Jennifer, when the mills come in for those prices, when they come in and say, I'm the first one to jump in, do you often see divergences from mill to mill or mill location to mill location or certain regional divergences? Like, do you see gaps, or is it usually, the first number is usually where it hits and where it fills up?
It depends on the mill's demand and what their program is going to be that month. If they have a huge program, they might pay more money, right? There might be an increased number that's out there just to make sure that they can capture the market, knowing that there may not be as much scrap for that particular grade. For instance, like busheling, usually in more demand in some areas based on the product that they make.
Sure.
Right? But if it's a product that maybe they know is more readily available, maybe they might drop the number a little bit, right? And it's all based on this epic telephone game of how much of this particular grade is out there, how much of the overall scrap market in terms of scrap flows is out there in the region, what's available by barge, what's available by rail car, what's available by truck. Is the river available this month? Did your Chicago river freeze up, in the wintertime this month? These are all factors that play into the first week of the month and whether or not the scrap flows are going to affect the prices.
And
So it sounds like this game of telephone is actually a pretty transparent thing in fact, but it's mostly just kind of a closed loop system of those people who are trying to fill up the mills and sell to the mills.
Yeah. Yes, exactly.
Interesting.
And like I always do, I'm going to bring it back to the everyday man. I mean, you got the two metal experts here, but we're talking about the busheling scrap that mills will purchase to go in and then produce finished goods, correct? So this is impacting what the price that you're essentially debating on the first week is going to set the price of one of the key ingredients, and that'll dictate the steel price, correct?
Correct. Right. So what price reporting agencies typically do is they will start essentially surveying the market. They'll be calling former traders like myself and saying, what did you end up selling that busheling for this month? They'll start calling around to the steel mills. What did you end up buying that busheling for? And then they will essentially come up with their formula, and then they will publish that price. And that price is what is going into your contracts. And that is what the published price is. And again, I'm very much generalizing it, but that's essentially what a price reporting agency will do when they are issuing their price assessment.
Very interesting. So I know DJJ does trade other things other than just carbon scrap. Do you, maybe you know the answer to this perfectly, but is the base metals world kind of the same animal where it goes through the same monthly cycles, or how is it similar? How is it different?
No, so base metals is it is your wild card. So non-ferrous is very different. Non-ferrous can be hour by hour, day by day, because non-ferrous trades more in line with the futures markets. And if there's a spike on the aluminum or copper markets that day, people have that readily available because you can move a truckload of copper a lot easier than obviously a barge of shredded material, right? So that is something that the non-ferrous traders need to be on their toes every single day. And they need to be aware of what's happening hour by hour, day by day with those markets. And versus on the ferrous side of things, yes, they do need to still be aware every single day what's going on, but it's not as closely tied to what's happening to their futures market.
Excellent.
So how would an event like what happened with Baltimore's Key Bridge? I mean, we learned last month that controls 20% of the flow of aluminum into the country. I would imagine something like that would have a pretty big effect on that first week of the month you're involved with.
Yes. So it's going to be an effect on the aluminum market. In that space, it is something that they're going to have to be shifting some of the flow into some of the other ports. In this case, on the recycled metal side of things, that is already a strain. There is an increased amount of production capacity on the recycled aluminum side coming into the United States already, as in we are adding a lot of production capacity for the production of aluminum made from recycled aluminum. And we just don't have enough of that recycled aluminum here today. And we already have to import a lot of the aluminum, especially primary aluminum, into the United States to meet our demand. So Baltimore is not great for two reasons: the primary imports and as well as the scrap recycled materials side of things as well.
That's okay. Now, I should have mentioned at the top of the hour, like always, we're live. If you got a question, drop in the Q&A button. Mind if I throw a few at you, Jennifer, from the audience?
Go for it.
First question here, I'm going to have to kind of rephrase. So essentially what you're describing, are we relying on one big who can guess the price the best?
I like to call it more of, remember, at the LME when there actually was a trading circle and you had to basically kind of figure out where the market was actually trading at. That's more of what this is in real time. It's essentially, from a more day-to-day real life, you've got a product and you've got a market. What is the market willing to pay for it? That's essentially what this is you've got 100 people in the market, right? What is that market willing to pay for it? And that's what happens every single month. That's essentially what this is you've got 100 suppliers and you've got, we'll call it 10 in a particular region, 10 consumers. What are those 10 consumers willing to pay those 100 suppliers for that product? And that's essentially what's happening every single month.
Interesting.
I hate to park you here on the scrap because I want to get to some other things as well. But another question from the audience: how does virgin iron price impact scrap price?
So the melt shop managers are the ones that I'll say factor into this, because essentially it's an equation. You look at the recovery of those products in the furnace to factor in whether or not you buy them or not. Essentially, you look at the recovery. So in this particular question, I believe they're talking about pig iron, DRI, HBI, essentially the iron, the scrap substitutes. Essentially, they recover at different percentages than, say, scrap does. And they have different chemistry alloys, if you will. And so at the different price levels that they are at and the different percentages, you essentially have to do the formula of, does it make sense for me to essentially buy pig iron because it recovers, 80, 90%, 95%, whatever, in your furnace, depending on the quality, at this price, versus I know that I can buy busheling at this price and it recovers at this rate, right? And it's at a lower price. Like for reference right now, pig iron is here, busheling is at a lower price. It makes more sense right now to purchase busheling, to be frank.
Sure.
But in certain situations, if you need an auto grade level of steel, you might need to purchase some of those scrap substitutes just to get the clean steel.
That makes sense. Okay.
Versus scrap.
Okay. Nice.
Mike, we warned the audience we were going to get technical in the weeds today. We certainly are. I love it.
Yeah, this is the questions keep coming. So let me want a glass of water? Want to take a breather? Jennifer, are you good?
Where's the whiteboard? Hold on.
And thank you for getting, I think that this is exactly why we wanted to bring you on too, because I think this is really a fascinating discussion, and thank you for taking the time to kind of walk us through it. The question here is, what is your take on scrap supply? Will we see any shortages with the increased demand for more EAFs coming online? And, this is a conversation we have a lot, right? Electric arch furnaces, right? And, a lot of our suppliers are moving that way. So it's definitely top of mind. So what do you think of that? Any shortages with the increase?
Yes, two answers. Short answer, the United States will be fine. We're great. Okay. Long answer, from a global perspective, there will be concerns of a scrap shortage. And I need to go back and kind of paint the picture of how EAF versus integrated from scratch is set up region by region. So in the United States, the reason why I'm saying that we're going to be fine, even though we're currently set up 70% and growing EAF versus 30% integrated. We are a scrap-rich nation.
Mhm.
We export something like 17 million tons of ferrous scrap a year. And just for reference, Nucor consumes like 20 million tons a year, and they're the largest steel producer in North America. So like we're good currently. Okay. We basically would need another Nucor to consume the amount of scrap that we produce. Now, when you jump over to Europe, though, Europe is currently the flip-flop. 70% of how they are set up is integrated, 30% is EAF. And they have a huge push to switch that because they want to reduce carbon emissions. They want a reduction in their reliance on some of their raw material supplies. And so you're seeing them have a huge push for scrap. Where they're going to get that is a little bit of a question. If you jump over to China, from a scale perspective, 10% of their steel industry is EAF. But from a scale, that 10% is roughly the same size as the entire United States steel production capacity. So if they ever decided to say, we want to go to 20% EAF capacity, where are they getting that scrap? So the United States is fine currently, right? Like within our borders, we produce plenty of scrap. But from a global perspective, we need some of the other countries to get those second, third, fourth generations wanting to buy that second and third washer and dryer. We want them to get that third or fourth car, run it into the ground, get that next car and send it to a shredder, right? We need them to start generating more metal scrap so that they can start producing their own scrap.
Sure. Sense. And Nick, tying back to your world, how does this all tie in with the price of steel right now? And you talk a lot about the price of busheling, and I guess are you seeing an impact on this right now?
Yeah, I mean, and we'll get into steel prices more specifically here in 5-10 minutes probably. But yeah, I mean, I would say within the scrap world, on the pricing side, so within the spot market, it's actually quite stable right now, across all grades of carbon steel, whether we're talking busheling, heavy melt, or shredded scrap. They're all kind of troughed, and they're flat month over month. And the early readings that I'm seeing for May is the expectation we're going to see a continued, mostly sideways move through the month of May, and then there are some small tinges of optimism as we look into June. And ultimately, what that means for steel prices is, I think the relationship may be a little softer than pre-pandemic type times, but there's no doubt about it. The biggest input going into steel making here within North America is scrap. So they're going to pass through whatever increases they see on the raw ingredient side through to their customers, most likely.
We keep getting technical questions here from the audience. Do you know the percentage of global scrap steel that's coming out of Turkey?
Say that global. Say the question.
Roughly what percentage of global scrap steel supply is coming out of Turkey? Bet you never thought you were going to be asked that question.
So I wouldn't say that scrap comes out of Turkey. I think maybe the question is the scrap goes into, I think they're trying to say scrap goes into Turkey, maybe.
I believe so. Yeah.
Okay.
I believe so. Yeah. Yep.
I don't have a stat that I want to share offhand, because I don't want to say the incorrect stat, but it is a decent chunk that goes into Turkey. Turkey, in terms of from like global perspective, does influence the export market when it comes to export prices, because it has a fairly decent, obviously, steel market over there. But for reference, the types of products that it makes, it really only influences the lower grade export items. So, your heavy melts, maybe a little bit of PNS, if you will, in terms of those grades. So things that go into rebar and higher residual steel on that front.
Nice. Nice way to answer that. Nice. Thinking on your feet on that one. I like to.
Yes.
What else is going on in the world of recycled metals, right? I know we're talking a lot about kind of the scrap flows and picking your brain there, but like what else is really impacting the market right now from a recycled material metals perspective in your eyes?
You know, I know we're talking a lot about steel here, but I do want to kind of, go macro on the United States just in general. We're really well set up from a metals manufacturing perspective. And sometimes I think we forget about that from a recycled material standpoint, from a green energy standpoint, from a labor force standpoint, to the point where other industries, other companies from international perspectives are coming to the United States and they're making major investments. They're setting up manufacturing facilities here because of a lot of the stats that I shared at the beginning of the show. We've got the raw materials here, we've got the labor force here, and we have a multitude of green energy options here. So that for the next generation, I would say, we really are kind of the it country, if you will, on that front. And it's a really great spot for us to be in. And I don't necessarily think we're advertising that enough for recruitment purposes, maybe for lobbying purposes on some of those things. So I just want to kind of put that little nugget in the back of some people's heads for their own information on that front. And that goes across like the full metals spectrum. I mean, this is not just steel, this is aluminum, copper. I mean, across the board, we're seeing this.
No, it makes a ton of sense. And actually, our CEO is a big proponent of the phrase to say the United States and North America generally is the best risk-adjusted place for manufacturing. That when you consider all of the geopolitical issues, the security of whether it's metal, raw ingredients, or energy. Mike, I know you and I have talked quite a bit about the energy side of things and the fact that we are in a very good place from an energy standpoint, whereas Europe very much so is not, or much less so at this stage. All of these things kind of have some crossover into the metals and raw ingredients world, it seems.
Well, to what you were speaking at the top of the show, Jennifer. I mean, this is an exciting industry and different ways to attract talent, workforce, right? It's there's a lot of exciting things going on in this market, and those are, I think, the platforms that you take and to elevate that kind of information. What we do here, I think, really kind of helps the matter.
Absolutely.
I love the Cup of Joe audience. Who did the lining of your jacket? That's the question.
I appreciate I really appreciate it. I specifically wore this jacket for you guys today on that reason. So I love that somebody picked up on it. It is actually nice. I don't know if you can see it. It's Bulls and Bears.
Nice.
There is a wonderful store in Cincinnati called Romaldo. They do blazers that are fantastic. So a little shout out to them. But yes, nice. I wore my market blazer for your market show today.
Wonderful. Yeah,
this month's podcast is sponsored by Romaldo's.
Romaldo's in Cincinnati. Yes.
That was our ad break. Yes.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Jennifer, I want to get into some of the metal side. Will you stick around? We've got some more questions coming in. Nick, is there anything else we want to talk with Jennifer about before we kind of move into the metal side?
Covered a lot of really good ground, really good content in there. That was great.
Okay, I'd like to do a little prelude here. Prelude's not the right word. Little park in here in the middle. As I mentioned earlier, Jennifer has her own podcast, Bets on the Future. Little plug for that. Elevator pitch on that, Jennifer, if you could, for the audience.
Absolutely. It's a podcast about the variety of careers that are in the metals industry, from raw materials to OEMs, just to get the next generation excited about our industry as told by the incredible women that are leading those careers.
Wonderful. And there's Cup of Joe here. So I thought it'd be fun to put Jennifer and Nick on the hot seat to see how much they know of each other's show. So what I'd like to do here is I got 3 questions about Cup of Joe that I'd like to ask Jennifer, and I've got 3 questions about Bets on the Future, which I'd like to ask Nick. And Nick's a little groggy because I think he was cramming all the episodes of Bets on the Future last night to prepare for this.
That's right.
So the first one, let me just move my thing here. See that? All right. So in what year did Cup of Joe's first episode air? I got 3 options for you here. If I can get this to work. 2020, 2021, or 2022?
Ah, I feel like you guys have been on for 4 years, but I feel like this is also a trick question.
No trick questions.
I'm going 2021.
You're right.
Boom.
Yes.
Oh, love
All
it.
right. All right.
All right. The next one, you're not going to get any options. Aside from you, we've had one other guest outside of Ryerson. Name this individual from a steel mill who has a celebrity name.
Can I give the full name or can I give the nickname?
Oh,
I think either one works.
yeah, either one. Yeah.
Can I go with McBeamy? Patrick
Yes.
Dempsey?
Patrick
Yes.
Dempsey from
Nailed
Nucor. Yes,
Yes.
yes.
Love
And
it.
for those who haven't seen heard that episode, we actually talked to Patrick, and he had some fun with the name. He gets mistaken for the actor from Grey's Anatomy, I believe he's on. And McDreamy, they call him McBeamy, which great nickname. Love it.
And Mike, we're going to be revisiting Patrick Dempsey due to some things that are going on in the last 30 days.
Yep. All right, last one for you here. In what way does Nick often describe a market trend on the show? He has kind of a catchphrase or a catch. I want to put it on a t-shirt, right? So is it parabolic, supersonic, or Dr. Dre's debut album from 1992, The Chronic?
Okay.
I think we can rule one out.
I don't
rhymes.
know. I
It
feel
rhymes.
like after the Taylor Swift comments, it could be. I'm gonna go with parabolic.
Parabolic it is.
She's good.
You're
She's
3 for
good.
3.
Yes.
Yeah,
The
everything's going
cramming
parabolic
session
there.
worked.
Nice. Well
Can
done.
only
You
go
know,
downhill from here.
Cup of Joe. Oh, all right, Nick, you ready?
I'm ready.
When did Bets on the Future debut? November 2022, May 2023, or June 2023?
I have to name the month. I'm going to say June of 2023.
Boom, got it.
Oh,
All right.
man.
In episode 4, at the 6-minute and 14 mark, now,
Wow.
of the 26 guests that have appeared on Bets on the Future, how many came from Ryerson? 5, 2, 1. Bonus points if you can name
2. And I'm going to say Sarah Moran, and I don't know on the second one. Eddie Lehner, I'll say.
them. No, close. Lisa Shelton.
Oh,
Who's
nice.
in the world of pre-paint. Yeah, we'll
Excellent.
give you that one. You didn't have to name the people, so you're 2 for 2. All right. Jennifer has not had a guest from this organization on Bets on the Future. Steel Market Update, Scrap University Kids, very interesting organization. The Ohio State University.
I'm going to say Ohio State.
Boom, got it.
Oh,
you two know
it's a
you two
disgrace.
know his stuff. There you go.
There you go.
Have to
My
have
alma
Justin
mater.
Fields on your show. There you go. There you go. Nick's from Ohio State. Have him on. Well, thanks for playing along. And Jennifer, please stick around. More questions to come.
Will do.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And again, some of the content is going to look similar. Some of it's going to look very, very different. We'll go ahead and hop into just a quick bit on the macro side, as we always do. This is the Purchasing Managers Index as shown by S&P Global. There, over on the left-hand side, you've got alphabetical order around the globe. Left to right is going to be year ago to present. And you can see as you look over on the far right-hand side, it's a pretty mixed story. It continues to be very, very mixed, where you've got some extremely hot pockets like India. You've got some very weak pockets like Europe, although it is inflecting a little bit higher within Europe. So things are getting a little better, although it still is in negative territory. And then 3 from the bottom down for the United States, we've got the United States sitting right flat at 50. So it's softened up a little bit from Q1 numbers, which were showing some decent growth. I would say it's gotten a little more mixed for manufacturing data in the last month or so, but it still is looking decent. It's very mixed story as we work around the globe. And then China has actually inflected slightly higher as well. So a little bit of optimism there. And I think we'll see that feeding into some optimism when we look at base metals prices. Looking similarly at the ISM data, so this is the Institute of Supply Management. I like this index because they give us a lot of the line items. Some of the line items are pretty interesting. The headline one, obviously, it's flipped from growth territory into slight contractionary territory. 1 month does not make a trend, but this does coincide with some of the softness that we're seeing within the headline numbers on the S&P Global. One that really jumped out that I think is certainly going to pique the Fed's interest and anybody who's watching inflation closely. You see the white line about 5 or 6 down. Prices for manufactured products have jumped dramatically. So this is a pretty pesky combination where you've got slightly slowing growth and prices really running hot. And then I would say, we talked a lot about some of the prices perking up last month and the issues that can cause. You look at the manufacturing world right now, there is this potential, and I don't want to, raise the alarm bells or anything, but the idea of slower growth and high inflation, also called stagflation, would be a very pesky thing for markets should we see these trends continue. But again, this is just 1 month's data, fairly mixed at the moment, but inflation has certainly perked back up in the last 40 to 60 days. And then looking at end market demand, mostly the same story. Certainly a lot of tangential construction related industries that are doing very well, things like non-res construction, HVAC, construction machinery, all those markets are doing quite well. Over on the far left-hand side, the one doing the strongest in the month of March, because this is a little bit of lag data within the Census Bureau, farm machinery shipments have come in extremely hot. And again, this is year-over-year data, so it does account for seasonality. That's a space that's really ticking higher in a pretty meaningful way. So that's something we certainly want to keep an eye on. I would note that over on the weaker end, where we've got things like motor vehicle shipments, we've got non-defense aircraft shipments over on the far right-hand side. Those are slightly weaker. The aircraft shipment data month over month just is really choppy. It's 1 month it'll be the hottest data point, the next month it's the weakest data point. I think a lot of that's stemming from the issues that are coming out of Boeing. They're obviously having their own headaches at the moment. But yeah, fairly mixed story within the end market side of things, but it's okay. Now, where I really want to focus the attention this month is we've got a lot of very headline oriented things. Some very meaningful, some perhaps not as meaningful yet, relating to the metals markets. And I've got the headlines up here on the screen for those who are able to view this. But the first one is, the White House basically calling for the potential to raise tariffs on steel and aluminum. If that sounds familiar to our prior president, it should. I would say that both sides of the aisle seem to be fairly well aligned, and I'm not here to talk politics, but both sides of the aisle seem to be fairly well aligned for now on the notion of protecting American workers, particularly steel and aluminum workers. There's been a lot of rhetoric, obviously, around the U.S. Steel and Nippon Steel deal and what the implications of that could mean. What I would note on this is a couple things. One is, when we look at these products, steel and aluminum, they already have tariffs on them. In the case of things like Chinese steel sheet, they've got tariffs on them that are akin to 400, 500, 600%. So in many cases, we in America are already not buying these products because the tariffs are so exorbitant and so it's extreme that it just doesn't make it worthwhile financially. So this one has not been put into place yet. So I think that's the important thing to keep in mind. But it is something we want to keep an eye on if it does go into effect. A lot of the the data services and research entities that we follow, they suggest that on the aluminum side, there could be an impact on foil markets and on can sheet. But for the most part, on common alloy aluminum and things like that, the expectation is it's going to be much more muted if it goes into effect, but it is not in effect yet. The second headline is that Mexico has put in place permanently some tariffs on Chinese goods and raising those tariff rates from 5 to up to 50%. So this one has the potential to be meaningful. It's one that we're still digesting internally at Ryerson. I think the markets generally are digesting because it could actually impact the cost of importing a lot of regions metal into that country. one of the things that we have seen thus far is that there are some policies in place within the country that allow certain industries, certain end markets to circumvent some of these tariffs. There's also, some clauses that allow if you are importing product in order to immediately export product, those also allow certain companies to sidestep some of these tariffs. So I think more to be seen on that topic, but it could be meaningful, particularly for anybody who's operating in Mexico or importing product from Mexico.
Nick, of those 444 goods, it's not all metal, right? We're talking textiles, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
And then, more near and dear to my world, the London Metal Exchange and the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, which is COMEX, basically the US and the UK have put in place a couple things. One is the banning of the United States to import Russian copper, nickel, and aluminum. So US can no longer import Russian copper, nickel, aluminum. Fairly meaningful, I would say. For the most part, US companies were not doing a whole lot of that already. But for those who were, obviously they're going to have to cease doing that. The second thing they did was, and this is kind of specific, they banned the ability to put newly produced Russian metal onto the exchange warehouse system. Now, that may not sound like real meaningful because, for anybody who's on this podcast, they may be buying metal from Ryerson or directly from an aluminum mill or something like that. Why do we care about the warehouse system? Well, what I've got up here on the screen, this is what's called the country of origin report from the London Metal Exchange. And what it's attempting to do ultimately is, and it shows it for every country in the world who puts metal onto the exchanges, but what it's ultimately showing here is I've honed in on Russian metal that currently exists on the London Metal Exchange. And I highlighted a few of these in red because they're the ones that we primarily deal in. And you look at things like copper, 62% of the metal that exists in the London Metal Exchange warehouse system right now is of Russian origin. So I don't exactly want to call it damaged goods because it's fine material, but it's produced by a country who's now under sanctions. So there's a little bit of an asterisk next to that material because obviously here in the United States, we can no longer import that metal into the US due to these bans. Nickel. So
Nick, sorry, like what happens to that inventory? It's just, it can't come here, right? But it can be maybe at a lesser price go to other countries.
That's exactly right. And I've actually got a slide on some of the ramifications of what this may mean, but and I won't read through all of them, but nickel at 36%, aluminum all the way up at 91%. So the vast majority of aluminum that's currently sitting in the warehouses is, for lack of a better phrase, damaged goods. It doesn't mean that it's illegal for countries like India or China or somebody like that to buy. Should they want to, these sanctions do not impact. But for the Western world, it, for the most part, does mean that we will not be able to touch any of that material. So, I've kind of summarized it with the following to say we've really kind of developed a bit of a tiered system within these commodities where, tier one, the undiscounted metal, I would call anything produced by anybody other than Russia. It's essentially, it's allowed to go on the exchanges. It's allowed to go into the United States. It's much less impacted in terms of trade flows. You've then got tier two, which is any Russian metal that's been produced prior to April 13th. Why April 13th? That was when the sanctions were put in place. So anything that's produced prior to April 13th, it can still stay on the exchanges. It can move around the world as long as it doesn't come to the United States. But I would say, to your point, it likely has a slight discount on it because it's got that Russian logo on it. And it is a different animal due to these sanctions. And then third tier, which I would say is likely going to be even more discounted, is any newly produced copper, aluminum, or nickel, anything that's produced after April 13th, because that not only can't go to the United States, it also can't be delivered onto the Chicago Mercantile Exchange warehouse system or the London Metal Exchange warehouse system, which is really kind of a marketplace of last resort. That's what those exchanges are supposed to be. And that metal can no longer go into those places. So I would say that newly produced metal is likely, it's still going to be traded, it's still going to be produced, but likely to discount and likely mostly into the eastern portions of the world.
Interesting. Okay. They're heavily discounted could be, wow, that's then going to other parts of the world really.
Yeah. And again, I should probably highlight, these are the opinions of Nick Webb. But yeah, I mean, there is a little bit of a perverse phenomenon that could be taking place whereby you almost cause a little bit of inflation to the West because we can no longer access some of these products. You actually cause a little bit of deflation into other parts of the world where they can access these metals. So, you know, I'm not sure it fully accomplishes everything that we set out to, but this is what we got to work with.
What do listeners need to look out for with this, right? Is it now, I mean, always finding your country of origin, right, of where it's coming from, but is it just paying closer attention now? I mean,
yeah, I mean, I think these are the questions that end customers, OEMs need to be talking to their suppliers to make sure that they aren't importing those products. Hopefully they haven't been for a little while. If they have been, hopefully they're changing very, very quickly. But yeah, I think that's the key.
Yep.
Now, secondarily, so that was all base metals world. On the carbon side of things, we've gotten a lot of questions internally about this one. We have two new announcements, one from Nucor on the left-hand side, one from Cliffs. And Jennifer, I'm gonna call out real quick. Do you know what percentage of US steel is produced by the two of these entities?
So Nucor, you're talking about just like HRC or just like Nucor?
Yeah, carbon steel, yes.
Nucor is roughly 25% of the market, just like steel producing in general, but HRC, so generally speaking, it's like a third, but Cliffs is number one, then it's US Steel, then I think it's Nucor, like ish. They're similar-ish.
Okay. And the reason why I bring that up is really just to highlight the fact that the two of these entities are very large players within the market. So as they move, they can have very meaningful impacts on the market. So what's happened? Well, prior to this month, the primary mechanism for buying steel under a contract was the CRU. What the CRU does is they survey their customer base, and we don't know. I'm saying a lot of things off the cuff, but we don't know whether that customer base is 5 customers or 5,000 customers. They don't tell you, but they don't need to tell you. For the most part, you know, this index operates, you know, normally every single Wednesday. It gets published, and those prices, either a monthly average or oftentimes the second Wednesday, those prices that are submitted become the price to buy steel at for the following month. Is how that works. And I apologize if I'm insulting anybody's intelligence. What Cliffs and Nucor have announced is a spot index, in my opinion, in effect to compete with the CRU, perhaps. Nucor is going to publish this price on a weekly basis. Cliffs, for now, is going to publish this price on a monthly basis, though it is subject to change. So it can move around intra-month, perhaps. For now, the two prices, Nucor's current spot hot roll price is $825. Cliff's price is $850. And I think it's worth noting that currently we have a CRU number this week that's $813, which to me says, well, for now, these prices are not fully feeding into the market because the index is setting the contracts, the CRU, is actually at a lower number to both of these. But according to both of these mills and these letters they sent out to all their customers, these spot numbers are now going to be anytime you go to the mill, one of these two mills, and you want a spot transaction for hot roll coil, these are going to be the numbers. There's no discounting. There's no volumetric discount. So if you want 5 tons or 5,000 tons, these are your numbers. And that's all we really know at this stage. Why did they do it? Well, I think there is a little bit of this is my opinion. I think there's a little bit of discomfort from some of the mills that they don't love the CRU index. They don't think it's a good representation of the market. And as such, they want to take control of it. And obviously, given their size, they have the potential that they could take a little control of it. Now, on the other hand, I would make the argument that there's a potential that if Nucor and Cliffs have these indexes out there, and if they are in fact selling metal at these prices, if one of those customers that buys metal at those prices happens to also be a CRU submission entity, there is a chance that in the next week or two, that purchase could feed into the CRU, so you could get a little bit of a circular loop. So from that vantage point, these numbers are certainly something we want to keep an eye on. As I mentioned, it is curious because right now we already have a CRU that is pricing at a discount to both of these, which to me suggests one of two things. Either somebody is buying at a discount from one of these two entities, or somebody who's submitting to the CRU is not buying from these two entities because, or they're, you know, they have to be buying at a lower price somewhere else. So it's a pretty interesting thing. For now, it feels like mostly a non-market moving event. Certainly something we're keeping an eye on. We've gotten a lot of questions about this. And for now, I'm not aware of any contracts being tied to these. I think they're too young. So most steel these days, most carbon sheet steel these days is still pricing off of either CRU or coming back to the scrap world, like a busheling scrap contract plus a spread. So kind of interesting times.
Yeah. It'll be interesting come end of the year contracts, right? You said most contracts right now being based on the CRU, but it could be maybe more newsworthy later.
Yeah, and rest assured, in subsequent Cup of Joes, as we get more data, when things become a little bit more statistically relevant, because right now we only have a couple data points, but we will run some correlation on these things and see if they actually are lining up with the indexes that currently set contract deals.
So would it be fair to consider like the CRU like a vanilla, like this is the vanilla flavor of pricing, right? And they're coming out with their specific prices to kind of.
Yeah, I don't know if vanilla is the right word. It's certainly the most actively used for physical pricing of contracts. It is perhaps the most well-known within the steel world, but there are competitors. AMM Fast Markets has one. Steel Market Update publishes an index, and then we've got the futures market as well that can give you access to a market-based pricing tool that trades every single day as well.
Yep.
And speaking of that, what we're looking at here is going to be the front month futures contract of hot roll, which ultimately I think it's worth noting. These futures contracts do also set and settle against the CRU. They don't settle against anything else. So again, the CRU is kind of showing its, I don't want to say dominance, but certainly its impact on the market. And what we're seeing is a little bit of a fade of the recent small rally that we saw about a month and a half ago. It's kind of a rally for ants in the last month and a half. Certainly doesn't look anything like what we saw in late 2023 or at the beginning of 2023, where prices jumped several $100s. We saw a little bit of an uptick and then kind of pulled back. And it feels like for now, we're finally, again, knock on wood, we're seeing a little bit of stability in the market. And we're seeing that stability both within the raw material side of things. If you're looking at scrap prices, they've been relatively subdued and mostly sideways for the last couple of months and expected to continue to be so. Even iron ore, as it's mostly linked to Chinese markets, has been somewhat subdued. It's volatile, but mostly subdued. And because of that, we're certainly seeing prices on hot roll settling in kind of the mid to low $800 range. And futures, which I don't have a chart for this, but futures are actually fairly tame right now as well, where they're mostly sideways. There's about a 3 to 4% upslope in the price of futures relative to the current spot number. But that in comparison to what we've seen over the last couple of years is very, very mundane, which I think should be good news for end customers buying steel. Things have kind of settled in a bit. Now, I mentioned this last month, and I should have kept my mouth shut, but I was making fun of how dull and boring aluminum markets were up until last month. And I said things were starting to perk up. Well, boy, did they perk up. Some of this is on the back of a lot of this sanction news. Some of this is on the back of technical factors, people, watching momentum indicators like what we've got here on this screen. We've got some of the moving average indicators. And then some of this is on the back of a bit of optimism out of China. But I think, we've highlighted the fact that for the better part of 2 years, we were kind of troughing along this area where there weren't a lot of smelters that were making a ton of money. And we were challenging that cost of producing aluminum ingot. And it got to a point where you had a couple curtailments, one in Spain, a couple in China. And when those things happen, you start to develop a bit of a floor in prices. And I will admit that the supply demand fundamentals for aluminum globally actually look fairly balanced. So this is a market that looks like it's got some support in and around here. Now, do I think it makes sense that we saw a 20% move in the price of the LME ingot price in, let's say, 3 weeks? Maybe not. That might have gotten a little extended. And you can see over there on the far right-hand side of this chart, it has pulled back a little bit. So I think people are kind of letting the dust settle on some of these headline items that we've talked about. But there's no doubt the momentum for now is to the upside, and things look somewhat positive. Premiums, same story. And we talked about this last month. Some of the premiums really moved higher on the back of the Baltimore Bridge collapse because a decent percentage of aluminum is being imported and exported through that port. In my opinion, that phenomenon is going to be somewhat short-lived. What I mean by that is already some small channels are being opened up within that channel of Baltimore. It's not fully open yet, but as that gets closer and closer to that point, logistical networks should get a little easier, which means taking aluminum into the Midwestern portion of the United States should get a little easier. Now, you can see in the last couple months, we have seen this number perk up. Futures are pretty perky right now, up around 21, 22 cents. And a lot of that's really centered around this growing narrative around protectionism, tariffs, and things like that. And that just has a bit of a risk premium built into the premium market. And then when we look at what traders are doing, this is the commitment of traders report. That's a fancy way of saying, are traders bullish or are they bearish? Anything above zero is indicative of a bullish, asset management community. And you can see in the last couple of weeks, they've certainly, jumped on the bandwagon on the bullish side. They've moved from slightly net bearish just about a month and a half ago, all the way up to 102,000 contracts, which one contract is 25 metric tons. And you can see, going back to the how bullish the market would have been back in 2021 when we saw record high aluminum prices. Very quickly, we're getting back into that realm, which is kind of shocking because we're certainly not seeing aluminum prices back at record highs, but the optimism, bullishness of the trading community is getting back into that type of realm. On the nickel side of things, in my opinion, it still looks like a very well-supplied market. Indonesia continues, on a fever pace to bring more units to market. But that being said, I think I touched on this at the very end of Cup of Joe last month, which is sometimes when base metals, a certain base metal looks optimistic, whether it's aluminum, whether it's copper, some traders will express their bullishness using ETFs or, baskets of commodities. And what can happen is, even though the story might be around copper or might be around aluminum, sometimes you do get a little spillover into other commodities. And I think some of that's what's happening here with nickel, where, the story for nickel isn't necessarily bullish, but nickel exists in these baskets, these ETFs, and gets a little bit of buy-side support just from people getting bullish for copper. So it's kind of interesting how that sometimes happens. And I think that's a little bit of what we've seen over the last couple of weeks. Nickel prices right now, right in the mid $8 per pound range. That's up about $1.50 from where we would have been 2 months ago. So certainly a meaningful move. Fundamentals, in my opinion, still look somewhat restrictive, but for now, we've seen things move a bit higher, which means higher surcharges for stainless steel. And you can see, a bit of this, in my opinion, is short covering as well. The trading community was getting more and more negative on the commodity, and you can see in the last 2 months, have flipped from slightly or from meaningfully net bearish into slight bullish territory. But I would say it's mostly neutral as we sit here today. Certainly doesn't look like the aluminum chart that we looked at just a couple slides ago. And then last but certainly not least, I think this is probably the most bullish of all of the base metals, particularly that we watch. I know tin has had quite a run over the last couple of months as well, but copper, and you can see, when we look at a 5-year chart, copper's the one that, we saw nickel prices sell off by 75%. We saw aluminum prices come off by 50%. Copper never had that sell-off. There was a sell-off, but it certainly was far less meaningful in terms of its magnitude back in 2022. And I think the fundamentals in the copper space just look really optimistic. And we've talked about this, ad nauseum, but First Quantum has a mine down in Peru that got shut down. It represented about 3% of global supplies. That certainly didn't help things. And that kicked off a bit of a rally. And, as we think about things like data centers and AI and computing, copper and energy are a potential bottleneck in that space. We're going to need to improve our grid globally, and copper certainly is going to be a beneficiary of that. And it's kind of wild to see, but I mean, just with this little rally that we've seen the last couple of months, we're back close to all-time record highs in copper prices. So certainly a lot of volatility. Not trying to make a commercial or anything, but to the extent you want to take any of this volatility out, ultimately that's my role here within Ryerson. So get with your sales rep and we can have those conversations. But this is a big move.
Is the COMEX news you announced earlier talked about, having an effect here? for copper as well?
It's at least had a little bit of a headline impact. Yeah, I mean, when those sanctions announcements came out, there was a knee-jerk bullish reaction, and not just copper, but in nickel and aluminum as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting.
Mm-hmm. So with that, that's what I've got, unless there are questions.
That's a mouthful. I had to let you roll through that one. No, interesting stuff. We got a few questions here from the audience. Really, the first one's just kind of a clarification when we talked about the tariff earlier. The first one they proposed from the Biden administration, the tariff is 25%. Is that up from 7.5%? Is that right?
So let me think. So the tariff in Mexico was going from, I believe it was 5% to 50%.
It was the first, the top.
The first one, that for aluminum, it was like 7.5 up to 30, I believe is the number. In the case of steel, I think they said they wanted to triple them. Now, again, these are just headlines. These are just proposals. Consider them rumors at this point because there's nothing material coming out of them yet. But yeah, they're fairly headline grabby for sure.
Yep. Jennifer, one's coming for you about the, we've talked in the past about some of these net zero carbon steel or, more sustainable materials, I guess. How's that having an impact on the whole recycle or more, energy efficient steel industry, if you will?
I mean, it's partially why you're seeing a push around the world for some of the investments. In Europe, you're seeing that push from the integrated to the EAFs. There's also a lot of investment going on in Europe from the integrated switching over to the hydrogen method for the blast furnaces as well. So there's a lot of investment going on there. For instance, SSAB over in Europe has already produced its first net zero steel that has already been used in Volvo products as well. Cleveland Cliffs, for instance, was awarded a $500 million grant to be used at their Middletown facility to convert their existing blast furnace to a DRI, direct reduced iron, which will be used using hydrogen to, again, help reduce the carbon emissions in that facility as well. So it is being talked about, it's being discussed, and a lot of that is actually coming from the marketplace, from OEMs, from their consumers. BMW is a big proponent of that, just as an example. And so it's driving it through our industry.
Yeah, makes sense.
Like that pun?
I do. Very nice. She fits in well, Nick.
Absolutely.
I think this is all on the brain now of everybody. Probably in the same vein of these net carbon steel fast markets, another commodities price reporting agency, if you will. They announced a new low carbon aluminum differential price in Asia. Nick, are you familiar with this, and what does it mean?
Yeah, I'm only briefly aware of it, but I think we want to see more and more of these things where, whether it's, Econic and their green steel or, as we make this push towards more and more ESG, I think there are going to be more indices that are going to have to track these things because people will want ways to, manage their costs, perhaps with hedging. So yeah, a lot of these things are growing trends for sure.
Yeah. Well, we're over time a little bit here. This has been a fun discussion. This is the point in the show where I ask for key takeaways. Jennifer, you being our guest, give us a key takeaway here, and let the audience know how could we further engage with Jennifer Betts.
Absolutely. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me on TikTok, the marvelous Mrs. Metals, Jennifer.Betts over there. But just a little tidbit of information. Your local scrap dealer, metal recycling facility, they're a great source of information because they're usually the ones that can be the first source of information because their scrap flows are usually the first indicator of whether or not your customer is slowing down or not. So just in terms of relationships out there in the marketplace, might be somebody that you want to connect with in the future.
Wonderful. Thank you. And thank you for being our guest. We really appreciate it.
Likewise.
And we're going to maybe do kind of an after hours or kind of off show, if you will, talking a little bit, diving deeper a little bit more into some of the marketing and efforts that we talked about at the top of the show. So Cup of Joe listeners, stay tuned for that one. Mr. Webb, a lot of stuff going on. Tell us what we need to know as we head into May. Well, we're in
A lot going on. I
further.
mean, I think if anybody's taken away, any key pieces from this discussion, it's that protectionism is alive and well. And I think both sides of the aisle, regardless of what party, gets into office here in 9 months, it seems like it's a reoccurring theme. Seems like it's going to be with us for quite some time, and if anything, going to continue growing. So that's going to create, these even just the headlines are going to create volatility in things like base metals as we're seeing right now. So stay close with your sales reps, and certainly always happy to hop on and have these discussions as customers see fit. So thank you everyone for your time. And by the way, during the podcast, we got a roller coaster ride of weather outside.
I know.
It was beautiful when we started, then it got horrendous. I think the color of my face kept changing because it was so dark outside.
Torrential downpour, right? Now it's sunny again.
Yeah.
That's
Hey, Jennifer, thank you so much for joining us. This is great.
Well, likewise, I really appreciate the opportunity, and I'm looking forward to talking a little bit more marketing and getting more folks in our industry a little bit out there, showing what we do, what we create here in the United States, North America, metals and manufacturing. It's pretty cool what we do.
Let's get people excited about the metalverse.
Yep.
Yes,
Why
exactly.
metal matters.
Yep.
And a reminder, YouTube, audio only, favorite podcasting platform. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you next month.
Thanks.
Thank you.